3 days after we buried my father, my brother sat down at the same kitchen table where that man had eaten breakfast for 50 years. And he told me it was time I stopped living off the family for free. Those were close to his exact words. "Let's be realistic, Loretta," he said, turning his coffee cup in his hands. My coffee, brewed in my pot, in the kitchen I'd scrubbed that very morning. You've had free reign of this whole place for 30 years, rent-free. Now that Dad's gone, don't you think it's only fair the rest of us finally get what's ours? We sell the farm, we split it 3 ways. It's the right thing. The right thing. He said it sitting under the clock my mother wound every Sunday of her life, in the house where I had washed my father's body's worth of bedsheets, fed him, turned him, sat up with him through the long nights at the end. Free reign, free rent, as though I'd been a guest here, as though the last 30 years of my life had been a vacation. What my brother did not know, as he turned that cup and explained to me how fair he intended to be, was that our father had done something the spring before he died, something quiet, something with his own hand and a man he trusted, while my brother was 300 miles away and too busy to visit. By the time it came to light, in a lawyer's office on the courthouse square, my brother's plan to sell my whole life out from under me was going to fall apart so completely that he wouldn't have one word left to say. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Loretta. I'm 70 years old, and I live on a wheat and cattle farm in central Kansas. The kind of country where you can watch a storm come at you for an hour before it arrives, where the grain elevator is the tallest thing for 20 miles and the wind never fully stops. My grandfather broke this ground. My father, Earl, farmed it his whole life, and I farmed it right alongside him, and I am farming it still. 400 acres of wheat, 100 head of cattle, a windbreak of cottonwoods my mother planted as switches that are 80 feet tall now. This is not just where I live. This is who I am. You'll want to remember that, because my brother and sister had forgotten it, or maybe never understood it. And that forgetting is the whole of the story. There is one thing my father did, in the last good spring of his life, that I didn't think much about at the time. I understand it now. It is the reason I'm telling you this from my own front porch, instead of from some apartment in town. I'll get to it. But you have to know what came before, because what came before is what earned it. My father and mother had 3 children. I was the middle one. My brother Roger came first, and my sister Cheryl came last. And I came in between, which they say is the child who holds the family together. And I suppose I tried. We grew up hard and happy, the way farm kids did then. All 3 of us on the same school bus. All 3 of us with chores before the sun. But Roger was restless from the start. He wanted off this land before he could drive. He was sharp, my brother. Sharp and hungry. And the day after he graduated, he was gone to the city. And he did well there. An insurance man. Then something with investments I never fully followed. A big house, a boat, the whole picture. Cheryl followed him a few years later. Married a man who sold farm equipment and then sold cars. And they did all right too, 2 states over. They sent Christmas cards. They came for some of the holidays. They were not bad people. I want to say that plainly, here at the start, because what came later was not the work of villains. It was the work of people who had let themselves forget what a place and a person are worth when you're not the one paying for them. I was the one who stayed. Let me set my coffee down a minute and ask you something, because I've been talking a while and I'd dearly love to know who's out there listening to an old farm woman tonight. Whatever town you're in, whatever country, Leave it down below where I can find it. The wind out here can make a person feel like the last soul on earth. It's good to know I'm not. There now, where was I? Yes. I was the one who stayed. I stayed because I loved it. First of all, the land and the work. In a way Roger never did, and Cheryl couldn't wait to leave behind. There is a kind of person the land gets into, and a kind it never does. And the same two parents can make one of each at the same supper table. But I stayed for them too, for our parents. And that staying cost me things I have never spoken of to a living soul. There was a young man once, an agriculture teacher named Daniel, gentle and funny, who took a job out in Oregon and stood in our kitchen and asked me to come with him and be his wife. I can still see his face. And I think about him sometimes, late. The life in Oregon I didn't live, the children I might have had, the woman I might have been somewhere green and far from this wind. I said no. I said no because my mother had been diagnosed 3 weeks before. And you do not leave your mother in the middle of that. You just don't. Not if you're built the way I'm built. He went to Oregon. I stayed in Kansas. And I have never once, not for a single day, gotten to find out who I'd have been if I'd gone. Then, some years on, I married Glenn, a good, steady local boy who loved this farm nearly as much as I did, with hands like cured leather and a laugh you could hear across a section. We worked it together for 31 years, the best years, until his heart gave out one August afternoon in the wheat stubble, and I found him there with the combine still running. We never had children. It wasn't to be, and we grieved that quietly between us, and then made our peace and poured ourselves into the land instead. So the farm became my child, in a way, and then my aging parents became my children too, in the end, the way they do, until I was a woman in my 60s, mothering everything and everyone, and being mothered by no one at all. My mother took 6 years to die. Cancer, the slow, ugly kind. I nursed her through every day of it, in this house. While Roger called on Sundays, and Cheryl came twice a year and told everyone how hard it was on her. I learned to give injections. I learned to lift a grown woman who couldn't lift herself. I held my mother's hand when she went, on a March night with the wind howling. And Roger made the funeral, but had to leave the next morning for a meeting. And Cheryl cried prettily at the graveside and was gone by supper. And then there was Daddy, and Daddy took 9 years more. He was strong until he wasn't, the way those big men are. He'd carried 100-pound feed sacks under each arm into his 70s. Then his mind started going first, in pieces, then in chunks. There were years at the end when he didn't always know what year it was, or that Mama was gone. And I'd have to tell him she'd passed, and watch him grieve her fresh, some mornings more than once. Do you know what that is? To bury your mother again and again in your father's face. To watch a strong man cry like a boy at a loss that's 9 years old to you and 9 seconds old to him. And to hold him through it. And then make his eggs the way he liked them, as though his heart hadn't just broken at your kitchen table. I do. I did it for 9 years. There were nights he wandered, and I'd find him out by the cattle pens in his nightclothes in February, certain he had chores. And I'd walk him back in across the frozen yard with my arm around him. This man who used to carry me. There were days he called me by my mother's name, and I let him because it made him happy. And a daughter can be her mother for an afternoon, if that's the kindness the day requires. I ran the farm by day, 400 acres and 100 head. The planting and the cutting and the carving and the 100 broken things a farm breaks every week. And I cared for him by night, and I did the books at the kitchen table at midnight when he was finally asleep. And I did not complain, because he was my father, and this was my place, and there was nobody else who was going to do it. Roger sent money sometimes, for hired help, and I want to be fair about that. He did. But money is the easy thing to send. You can send money from 300 miles away in the time it takes to drink your coffee. And then your conscience is clear, and your hands are still clean, and you never once have to walk your father back across a frozen yard at 2 a.m. Money is what you send instead of yourself. I learned that in those 9 years, and I have never unlearned it. Through all those years, my brother and sister carried a picture of this farm in their heads. And in that picture, it was an asset, a number, something that would be there, waiting, paid off and appreciating, for the day our father died and it could finally be turned into cash and divided. They never once saw it the way I saw it. As a living thing, I was keeping alive with my own 2 hands year after year, through drought and hail and the cattle market and my own grief. To them, it was an inheritance in waiting. To me, it was Tuesday. It was every Tuesday of my life. My father died in February, in his own bed, with me holding his hand, the way I'd held my mother's. He was clear at the very end, clearer than he'd been in years, and he looked at me and he said, "You stayed, Lo. You're the one that stayed." And I told him, "Hush, Daddy, rest." I didn't understand then that he was telling me something, that he'd already made sure of something. I understand it now. Roger and Cheryl came for the funeral, of course. And they were barely back from the cemetery before the picture in their heads came out of their mouths. It started gentle, the way these things do, dressed up as practical. The afternoon of the funeral, with the casseroles still warm on the counter, Roger was already pacing the yard on his phone, and I caught the words comps and per acre and right now while the market's up. By the next morning, he had it all worked out. He sat me down at that kitchen table and laid it out like the businessman he was, gentle and reasonable and absolutely certain. Sell the farm, sell the cattle, the equipment, the land, the house, all of it. Split the money 3 ways, even Steven, fair. He even had a realtor lined up, a man from the city, coming Thursday to walk the property. I said no. I said this was my home, that it had been my home and my work and my whole life for 30 years, that I had nowhere else to go and didn't want anywhere else, and that I would buy them out, somehow, over time, if it came to that, but that I would not see this land cut up and sold to strangers while I was still breathing. I said Daddy would never have wanted it sold. And that's when Roger's voice changed, just slightly, and the reasonable businessman showed me the thing underneath. He said, "Loretta, with respect, you don't have the money to buy anybody out. You've been living here for free for 30 years. You drew off this farm your whole life. The rest of us have been out there building something, paying our own way, while you sat out here playing farmer on Dad's dime. So no, you don't get to keep what belongs to all 3 of us, just because you're the one who happened to be standing here when he died. Playing farmer on Dad's dime. 30 years of dawn to dark, of drought and grief, and turning my father in his bed. And my brother called it playing farmer on Dad's dime. I want to tell you about the next 2 weeks, because the indignities came one on top of another, each one a little sharper, and I need you to feel how they stacked, because that's how a person gets ground down to where they'll sign almost anything. just to make it stop. The realtor came Thursday, and Roger walked him over my land, my wheat coming up green, my cattle, my mother's cottonwoods, pointing and talking about development potential and splitting the parcel and what the hunting crowd will pay for river frontage. And I stood on my own porch and watched a stranger in clean boots appraise my whole life in dollars per acre. And I'll tell you what stung nearly as bad as the words. It was knowing the whole county would see that sign and draw the easy conclusion that the old maid's sister had been pushed out, or worse, that there'd been a falling out and probably it was her fault. Because the ones who leave always come back looking shined up and reasonable, and the one who stayed is just the tired woman in the work clothes who must have done something to deserve it. Cheryl started in on the house. She went through my mother's things, our mother's things, with a notepad and a pen, marking what she wanted. The good china, the cedar chest, Mama's quilts that took her 4 winters to piece, the clock. She'd lift a thing, look at the bottom of it, and write it down, the way you'd inventory a stranger's estate at an auction. She found me in the kitchen and held up our mother's wedding ring, which I had kept in a little dish by the sink since the day Mama died, touched every morning. And she said, "I think this should come to me, don't you? Since you've had the run of everything else all these years." Had the run of everything. As though caring for our dying parents in this house had been some privilege I'd selfishly hogged from her. Then Roger produced the will. An old one, from years back, before Mama even got sick, that split everything equally among the 3 of us. The standard kind people make when their children are young and nobody's shown their true colors yet. He waved it like a winning hand. "It's right here in black and white, Loretta. Equal thirds. Dad's own wishes. You fighting this just makes you look greedy. And frankly, it's embarrassing the family." Me, greedy, embarrassing the family. I have to be fair, even now, because the truth always has more than one room. There was a moment, that second week, when I saw something flicker in my brother. We were standing at the cemetery, just the 2 of us, putting flowers on the fresh grave. And for about 10 seconds, Roger's businessman face came all the way off, and he looked down at that dirt and his chin went, and he whispered, "I should have come home more. I know I should have." And I thought, there he is. There's my brother. But then he straightened up and put the face back on and got back on the phone about comps before we'd even left the cemetery gate. Because grief, for Roger, was a door he couldn't afford to leave open, with that much money on the other side of it. I have held on to those 10 seconds. They're the reason I could do later what I did without hating him. He wasn't rotten. He was just running from something, and he'd decided money was the way to run. And Cheryl, my little sister, who I'd taught to ride a bike in the machine shed lot, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Cheryl wouldn't quite meet my eyes through any of it. She let Roger do the talking. But she went along. She marked our mother's quilts with her notepad, and she went along. And that, in its quiet way, hurt worse than anything Roger said out loud. Because Roger had always been Roger. But Cheryl I had thought was mine. That was the stretch when I stopped sleeping. Not from anger, from a kind of bottomless tiredness. The tiredness of a woman who has given everything she has to a family and is being told, at 70, that it counted for nothing. That she was a freeloader the whole time. That the only thing she's good for now is to sign on the line and disappear. And I'll be honest with you, because this is the truest part, and it is not the part where I'm brave. I nearly signed. Roger had the papers drawn up to list the farm, and a quitclaim besides, and he brought them to me on a Sunday, all gentle again now that he thought he'd won, the way a man gets gentle once he believes the fight's gone out of you. He put them on the kitchen table with a pen laid across the top, and he said, "Let's just get it done, Lo. It'll be a clean break for everybody. You can get yourself a nice little place in town, central heat, no stairs. No more of this back-breaking work at your age. Honestly, it's a kindness to you. It's time." And out at the end of my driveway, where every soul who drove the section road would see it, where the Hendersons and the Vogels and everyone I'd gone to church with my whole life would see it, the realtor had already staked his sign, "For sale, my grandfather's ground," with a stranger's phone number on it. And I want you to understand the shape I was in, because it's the shape they count on. I had no money to fight, not the kind of fight like that takes. I had no lawyer on a retainer. I had 30 years of dawn to dark and 2 long deaths in my body, and a brother and a sister and most of the family telling me I was the greedy one, the difficult one, the one embarrassing everybody by not just being reasonable. When enough people who are supposed to love you all say the same thing about you, you start to wonder if it's true. I sat there at my mother's table with that pen in my hand, 70 years old and so tired. And I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe a worn-out old woman should just take the third they'll give her and go quiet into town and stop making everyone's life so hard. I put the pen to the paper. I had started to make the L. I felt the ink catch. And then I remembered what my father said, 3 days before he died, holding my hand. "You stayed, Lo. You're the one that stayed." And I remembered the thing he'd done the spring before, the thing I'd told you about, the thing I hadn't understood. That spring, one of his last clear stretches, Daddy had asked me to drive him into town, into the county seat, to see Harlan Webb. Now Harlan Webb was Daddy's lawyer and his friend going back 60 years. The two of them had played dominoes every Thursday for half a century. Daddy said he just wanted to visit, to talk over old times. And he'd asked me to wait in the truck, said it was just men talking. And I'd sat in the truck for an hour in the spring sun and thought nothing of it. 2 old friends visiting. I'd forgotten it entirely until that pen was in my hand. I set the pen down. I told Roger I'd think it over and let him know in the morning. He smiled, sure I was beaten. And the next morning, before he was even up, I drove into town to see Harlan Webb. I want to slow down here, because the hour in that lawyer's office was the hour my whole life turned. And I almost didn't have it. Harlan Webb was past 80 by then, half retired, but his mind was a steel trap. He sat me down across his big desk, and when I told him what Roger was doing, that old man's face went still and hard. And then he reached into a locked drawer, and he took out a folder, and he said, "Loretta, your daddy came to me last spring, sat right where you're sitting, and he was as clear that day as I ever knew him. He told me he wanted to set things right while he still could. And he laid it out for me. My father, in that last clear spring, knowing his mind was going, knowing exactly which of his children had stayed and which had not, had made a new will, a new one, properly drawn, properly witnessed by Harlan and his secretary, dated and notarized, that revoked the old one Roger was waving around. And in that new will, my father left the farm, the land, the house, all of it, to me. Not split, not sold. To me, the one who stayed. He left Roger and Cheryl his savings, which were not nothing, a fair sum each, enough to be generous. But the land he left to the only one of his children who had ever treated it as anything but a check waiting to be cashed. And there was more. Harlan slid a second envelope across the desk. He said, "He left you this, too, in his own hand. Told me to give it to you if there was ever any trouble." I'd say there's trouble. It was a letter, in my father's careful old farmer's printing, the letters going a little shaky near the end, the way his hands had gone. I won't read you all of it. Some words a father writes a daughter stay between them and the dirt. But I'll tell you what it said in plain terms. It said he knew exactly what I'd given up to stay. He named it. He named Daniel, the Oregon man, by name, which near to knocked me out of my chair because I'd never told him. I'd never told anyone, and yet my father had known the whole time, had carried the knowing of my sacrifice quietly for 40 years, the way I'd carried him. It said he'd watched me bury my mother and then start the long, slow work of burying him, and never once heard me ask for a thing. It said he knew Roger and Cheryl would come for the land the very minute he was in the ground, because he knew his own children. He loved them, but he was not fooled by them. He'd raised them, and he knew which ones counted a place by what it meant, and which ones counted it by what it'd fetch. And then came the line I'll carry down into my own grave, written shaky but sure. A man leaves his farm to the one who loved it, not to the ones who only loved what it was worth. You stayed. Lo, the staying was the inheritance. The farm is just the paper that proves it. I sat in that office, in front of that kind old man, and I cried for the first time since we'd put my father in the ground. Not from grief, and not even, in that moment, from relief. I cried from being seen. For 30 years I had been the help, the freeloader, the one who happened to be standing here, the spinster sister playing farmer on Daddy's dime. And my father, reaching out from the far side of death with a shaky pen and a locked drawer and his oldest friend, had stood up and said, plain as the Kansas sky, this is what she was. The one who stayed. Do you know what that is worth? After 30 years of being told your love was a kind of laziness? It is worth more than 400 acres. It is worth more than anything that has ever been bought or sold on this earth. There was one more thing, and it was the thing that made it airtight. Harlan asked me, gently, whether I had any record of what I'd actually put into that farm over the years, in case Roger tried to fight the will by claiming I'd been a freeloader. And I almost laughed, because if there is one thing a farm woman who keeps the books at midnight has, it's records. I had a box, 30 years of it, every receipt for every repair I'd paid for out of my own and Glenn's money. The new roof, the well, the fence line, the times I'd covered the taxes myself in a bad year, the medical records, every one, with my name as the caregiver, the mileage, the nights in the hospital. I had the whole truth of those 30 years, dated and filed, sitting in a banker's box in my closet, because that is what you do when you are the one who actually carries a thing. You keep the receipts. The people who only show up at the end never have any. They never need them. That's the tell, in the end. The one telling the truth is the one with the box. I'd like to tell you there was a grand confrontation, but the truth was quieter than that, and better. I had Harlan Webb send Roger and Cheryl each a letter, official, with a copy of the new will, and I let the paper do the talking, the way my father would have wanted. Roger called me within the hour, and he was not gentle anymore. He shouted. He said it wasn't possible, that Dad wasn't in his right mind, that he'd contest it, that I'd manipulated a sick old man. And I let him run all the way down, the way you let a storm pass. And when he was done, I said the only thing I said to him in the whole of it. I said, Roger, the will is witnessed and notarized. From a day Harlan Webb will swear in any court, Daddy was sharp as a tack. And I've got a box in my closet with 30 years of receipts in it that says I'm the one who kept this place alive while you kept your distance. You want to take that into a courtroom? You go right ahead. But you and I both know what a judge is going to see. He's going to see the one who stayed and the ones who didn't. There was a long silence on the line. He did not take it to a courtroom. He'd been a businessman long enough to know a losing position when the numbers were laid in front of him. He hasn't spoken to me since. That's his choice. And it's a grief I carry, because he's my brother, and I'd have him back tomorrow if he'd come without his hand out. But I'll tell you who did come. Cheryl came. About a month after, she drove out alone, and she stood in my kitchen where she'd marked our mother's quilts, and my little sister cried and said she was ashamed, that she'd known the whole time it wasn't right, that she'd just been scared and broke and let Roger carry her along the way she always had. And I did the thing my father's letter taught me to do, which is to tell the truth kindly and let it land. I said, Cheryl, you went along. You marked Mama's quilts. That happened, and we both have to live knowing it. But you're standing in my kitchen now, and Roger isn't. And that counts for something. It counts for a lot, actually. And I gave her our mother's wedding ring, the one she'd tried to claim. I put it in her hand and I closed her fingers over it. Not because she'd earned it that hard month, but because she's my sister. And showing up to say you're sorry is its own kind of staying. The late kind. And the late kind still counts. I'm 70 years old, and I still live on my grandfather's ground, under my mother's cottonwoods, and the wheat came up gold again this June, the way it has every June of my life. I run it smaller now. I'm not too proud to admit my knees aren't what they were, and I leased some of the acres to a young farming family just starting out. The Hendersons, a husband and wife in their 30s, with 2 little ones and more grit than money. The way Glenn and I once were, the way somebody should have helped us. There's a particular joy I didn't expect, watching that young man cut my father's wheat, and that young woman hang laundry by my mother's cottonwoods, and their babies running the same yard I ran. The land doesn't care whose name is on the paper. It only cares that somebody loves it enough to stay. I kept the house. I kept the clock my mother wound every Sunday of her life, and I wind it now. And on the wall by my desk, framed, where I see it first thing every single morning, is one line of my father's shaky printing. You stayed. Lo. The staying was the inheritance. Cheryl comes now, 2 or 3 times a year, and we are slowly, carefully, becoming sisters again. The late kind, which still counts. Her Jenny, my niece, comes out most of the summer now and is learning the land at my elbow, the names of the cattle and the feel of wheat that's ready. And last August she said, shy, that she might like to farm someday. I told her the door would always be open and the light would always be on. Maybe she'll be the next one to stay. I believe she might. And if she does, there's a banker's box in my closet and a framed line on my wall that'll tell her everything she needs to know about what staying is worth. People think the cruelest thing is to be cut out of an inheritance, but I've come to believe the cruelest thing is to give your whole life to a family that has quietly decided your love doesn't count as much as their convenience, and to be told, when you finally look up, that you were the selfish one all along. That nearly broke me. What saved me wasn't the will, in the end. The will was just paper. What saved me was that one man, my daddy, paid enough attention to know who'd really been there, and cared enough to say so out loud, in writing, where it couldn't be argued with. So if you are the one who stays, the one who shows up, the one doing the quiet, unglamorous work of loving people while everyone else is off building something shinier, let me tell you what a Kansas farm and a father's letter taught me. They may not thank you. They may even call you the greedy one. But keep your receipts, keep your dignity, and never once believe the lie that showing up doesn't count. Showing up is the whole thing. Showing up was always the whole thing. It is the only inheritance that was ever real. And no one, not a brother, not a court, not a realtor's sign at the end of your driveway, can take it from the one who actually earned it. If this story found you tonight, stay a while, and I'll have another for you soon. And tell me, down below, are you the one in your family who stays? And where in this world are you keeping me company from tonight? I read every single one. Take care of yourself, and go check on the people who can't check on themselves.